Yoshiaki Onishi. 2 years ago you won the Gaudeamus Prijs in 2011.
Yes.
What happened since? What happened to your musical career?
Well, it's a funny question because I remember I have a colleague actually, his name is Christopher Trapani, who also won the Gaudeamus Prize. And he said to me, don't expect much to happen after you win. It kind of happens gradually or something like that. Well, I mean, for almost entire life, really, I've been really low key, so to say. I'm not without much of a activity, so to say. Although, but after I won it anyway, after the prize 2 years ago, there were a few things that happened. Whether it was related to the prize itself or not, that's another question. But as I am working on this piece, the Tramespace, which was performed at the Asko Schoenberg opening concert on the 2nd of September, I also received this commission through Ensemble Contemporain, which actually solidified my plan to do a diptych. And so the two-part piece will be actually the combination of the two commissions. So right now I'm working on the second part for the Ensemble Contemporain.
You're also conducting, right? Did you also take off from conducting this year?
That's something I've been doing on and off. I was doing the assistant conductor, which is the fellowship job for the Columbia University as a part of the doctorate program. I have been doing some conducting. I mean, whenever there's opportunity that presents itself, then I like to do it, obviously. For instance, after the 2 years ago, the Départ was performed here. There was the Gaudeamus in New York festival. And there, with the ensemble there called Inc. Ensemble, I actually conducted my Départ. And so that was the third performance of that piece. And things like that I do.
You're still working and living in New York most of the time?
Yes. In fact, this year is probably going to be the last year at Columbia. You see, I've been in New York because I've been doing the doctorate program at Columbia. And finally this year, it's time to write the thesis, which will be very interesting. But I think that so at Columbia there are two components to the thesis. One is the thesis piece, so you have to submit a piece of substantial, depth, let's say, and then I also have to write apparently about 50 or 60 pages, which I don't know yet, but I have to now write, that is using Microsoft Word or whatever, and I have to write the dissertation. But I think that the thesis piece is actually going to be the Asko Schoenberg piece, because I think that's probably, the one of the longest I did, and it will be longer.
Could you tell a bit more about that? The title is a conjunction of two terms in French, right?
Right. So Tramespace, trame is in English it means woof or weft, W-E-F-T, which is it's like a cross thread of a weaving textile. But as for the compositional level is concerned, I find that the basic element that you might learn at the not grade school, but theory courses like verticality of music or the horizontality of music or the timbre or the orchestration, etc., etc. I find this increasingly more and more important in my work, and so the word trame embodies that sort of let's say, attitude, compositional attitude, in the sense that the thread, or let's say the cross thread, to me it's an analogy of the, let's say, the musical materials, the sound materials. And the task for me is how to weave the material together. And so, in fact, I wrote quite a few pieces that has TR as a title, or the another one is trame, another trame piece. Mm-hmm. But so in a way, this Tramespace has a kind of a idea of somehow summing up. As I finished my study at Columbia and tried to move on to the next chapter after getting a doctorate degree, so I wanted to, in a way, make a little bit of a provisional conclusion, which of course is provisional. It's never a final conclusion. But I wanted to see how much I've accumulated my whatever knowledge or certain things I experienced over the past 5 years in New York. And so that's Tram. And Espace is an interesting one because I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's also a composer, Mahir Zetis, and he looked at my Départ, the piece from 2 years ago here at Gaudeamus, and he looked at me at the score and said to me, this presents a interesting idea of the compositional space or something like that. And at the time, I did not necessarily equate the act of composition with this space. So I actually didn't know what he meant by that. But I knew the space, is something interesting, as a word and some connotation, not just music. But he presented, so I thought it was back in my mind for a long time. Then as I was writing this piece, and this was in January, I actually became ill because I had a rather bad case of cold, and I couldn't move around. What I was doing was I was reading a lot of books, and there's this book in series of books actually called on this topic of philosophy of the Kyoto School of Philosophy, which is a particular branch of philosophy that comes out of Japan, which is quite a rare phenomenon. Anyway, one of the chapters of this book is devoted on this idea of self, let's say, and it goes on to really different interesting issues. And then I also came across another book, which was about this one of the instructional Zen pictures. This is called 10 ox herding pictures. In Japanese, it's called Jugyuzu, 10 cow tableau, the pictures or paintings, and it's a kind of a series of 10 paintings or drawings that shows the way to be the true self, you see. And I'm not really a Zen practitioner, or I don't really live with asking myself Zen question all the time or anything like that. But somehow when I came across that book for the first time when I was sick, maybe that's why I felt this way, but I was tremendously moved by it. Because as a composer, I felt, there's been always this question of some kind of identity, or some kind of again, the cultural code. Like, just because I'm from Japan, somehow my music somehow sounds Japanese, or some kind of bizarre speculations that others make. And I was, there was a part of me that was, troubled by it one way or the other. But when I came across the book, I was moved, and then I did not know why. And I kept reading, and it came, in one portion of the book is actually spent on the idea of space. This author of this actually a scholastic paper, which is really the book itself, upon the Jugyuzu, the 10 ox herding picture, his name is Shizuteru Ueda, and he's one of the biggest Kyoto school scholar, the philosophers, who is actually specializing on the topic of Meister Eckhart and Zen. And when he writes about this, 1,000-year-old, Jugyuzu, the thing, and he talks about Heidegger, in fact, in der Welt sein, the in the world being, the being in the world. And he takes that notion of in der Welt sein, which is really about self that has a lot of network of things from outside of self, and creating the world, the being itself. Being is as such, let's say. But he takes that notion even further. In order for this world to exist, collection of in der Welt sein, there has to be this world has to be situated in the ever-expanding infinite vastness. So he calls this notion the twofold. I translate it as double, but it's actually twofold in der Welt sein. And all these things I talked about just now really relates to some idea of space. And what I understand these days is that I think we are living in a society where this notion of how to perceive time is really based on the idea of somehow becoming aware in one way or the other with the notion of space. Because being aware of space takes time, and it's innately tied with time. And so for me, when I was writing this piece, the sound, when I was writing this piece, somehow the notion of space and trying to discover about myself through that all became really the idea of it's really hard to
It's really hard to concentrate with this kind of music, right?
No,
especially when they're singing.
But anyway, it really somehow, almost in a dialectical way, really start to unfold who I might be. It's something that I cannot really say who I am really, but this development of space, interior space, in my internal space, became really important, and that's why those two words, Tramespace. Yeah. And so that's the. I mean, it's a long explanation, I know, but actually, there's no other way to explain it, really.
Would you say that the music itself also is an expression of those same ideas or insights, or is it rather an evocation? In other words, is music, in this case or in general, about something, or is music just about itself and having an inspiration only?
In the shortest answer possible, it is itself. It is what it is. But that doesn't mean that I'm actually running away from the fact that I should explain my innermost feeling or things like that. It's not like that, because I think about this all the time, whether music tells something or music signifies something. Ultimately it does, but what it is really actually dependent on person who listens to it, I think. And as for listener, myself as the first listener, because I'm a composer who is the first listener of my own music, it tells me something. But then it's more interesting to me that I let that as a kind of an open question. Because I think that, I'm thinking about, for example, Roland Barthes, the Death of Author, for example. Like in that little essay, he writes about it's actually the reader who then collects and gathers the meaning of the text. It's not the author who describes, writes it. It's actually the reader who does that. In that sense, listeners have this tremendous responsibility to try to listen into it. Because, if I were to tell you the piece is about X, Y, and Z, they become passive somehow, the listener. And to me, that's something I want to avoid. And it's more interesting to me if somehow music offers some kind of question, a rhetorical question, or music presents itself. And somehow that creates, again, this sort of space in which whoever listens could somehow partake in this sort of a musical space and to think for themselves. To me, I find that way of understanding or getting introduced to the music is something that is critically important for sure. And so I think that your question is really like, I guess the shortest answer this time is really like it's really the itself, really. Yeah. Because it's so ephemeral, you see, and I think to me, when I say the word ephemeral, I think about the certain aspect of Japanese culture, like, for example, the cherry blossom that blooms but then falls down quickly. So it's really ephemeral thing. But it's almost, music, in a way, is similar to that. In other words, it has to, if it disappears, it should disappear in a nice way. And so that gives me responsibility as after reading the text, then when I compose it, in fact, it's a dialogic process, obviously. But it gives me the responsibility to make it good, and that's an ongoing challenge, and it will be ongoing, forever in a challenge, obviously. But yeah, I really agree. I mean, when we think about this, Heideggerian notion of sein and sein, we are talking about, and when we try to illuminate this through music, it really makes the music explicit in a sense that music is really a social phenomenon. Because music, once it's written, it has to be performed, it has to be listened to somehow. And for that, it has to have, being, but also the space. And all these things we talked about comes into one place. And I think that that's, to me, as a composer, it might not be constantly on my mind, but it's really important to keep that in back of my head, that music is, in fact, this might be interesting thing to say it out loud, but it's really a communication device in one way or the other. I do music because, after all, I do the best, I'm not really good as a writer, or I'm not even a good painter. My painting is really bad. Anyway, but I do music, probably the best thing I can do out of whatever I do. So I do it, and when I do it, then it becomes really important that, I try to do it as best as I can. I guess I'm a critical person, but I always feel the urge to somehow re-evaluate what's happening. And when I listen to people's music, it becomes rather obvious whether they really thought through materials in that sort of critical way, or they just throw it out there, which is really like a youthful expression, which I admire, I really cherish. But I'm curious what happens to their music like 10 years from now, for example. I guess the story will be a little different, but I guess I'm in a few moments I'm going to be upstairs and speaking about the crisis seminar thing. But I could say that, the world is really tough right now, and in many ways. But to see musicians playing all they got, like more than what they got, in their capacity, that is mind-blowing in a the positivist possible way, because that sort of energy is what we need. It's almost as though, they're saying, yes, there's this financial problem, but we really care first and foremost the music. And this sort of attitude is something that composers really need to learn as well, because keeping the musical integrity high, to me, that's what it comes down to more than anything, So.
Yoshi, thank you very much. Thank you so much for your conversation.
Thank you.